Hello, and welcome to Book Circle. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we will continue our reading of Village Diary by Miss Reed. A new chant to the Psalms had us all bogged down at church today, and I enjoyed watching the different methods of attack. My neighbor in the pew, Mr. Lamb from the post office, preserved an affronted silence. Mrs. Willett gobbled up 3/4 of each phrase on one uniform and neutral note, and then dragged out the last quarter in a nasal whine somewhere near the printed notes. Mrs. Pringle mooed slowly and heavily, a few beats behind the rest, but with an awful ponderous emphasis in the wrong places. While the vicar, with a sublime disregard for the organist's accompaniment, sang an entirely different chant altogether, and did it very well. I drove to Caxley to have tea with Amy and James. She talked quite wistfully of her few days' teaching, and I believe would jump at the chance to come again sometime. She was perturbed about a rash which had come out on her face. I must confess that I could only see it when my eyes were 2 inches from her cheek. I suggested that the Caxley water, which is villainously hard, might be responsible, and why didn't she use rainwater for a few days? "Water!" screamed Amy. If I had said vitriol, she couldn't have sounded more horrified. Did I realize that she hadn't touched her face with water for over 5 years? Only the very blandest and most expensive complexion milk was dabbed on, with an upward movement, thrice daily, with an occasional application of an astringent lotion which was prepared in Bond Street to her own prescription. Her beauty specialist had forbidden, positively forbidden, the use of water on such a very sensitive skin. I could only feel that layers of complexion milk over the years had probably formed a light cheese over Amy's face, which accounted for the rash. But as I was eating her delicious sponge cake at that moment, I was obliged in common courtesy to keep these thoughts to myself. I am now the somewhat bewildered possessor of an engaging kitten. It all began with Jimmy Waits asking if he could go home during the dinner hour to fetch 2 kittens. "So's Linda can choose which one she likes," he said. Mrs. Moffat had asked if Linda might keep it at school during the afternoon and return home with the pet of her choice in time for tea. This all seemed very agreeable, and the infants were delighted to hear that they would be entertaining 2 kittens for the afternoon session, and spent most of the morning preparing the doll's cradle for these much more exciting occupants. The doll, a cherished Edwardian beauty from the vicarage nursery, was propped up on the cupboard and surveyed her wanton young masters and mistresses with a glassy stare. Mrs. Annett had the greatest difficulty in persuading the children to drink their morning milk, but finally discovered that they were all hoarding it for the kittens' dissipation later. At length, a bottle was put up on the cupboard beside the slighted beauty for the guests, and the milk bottles emptied rapidly. Excitement ran high when Jimmy Waits entered with his basket. Mrs. Waits had prudently tied a blue check duster over the top, and when this was removed, 2 pretty kittens peered out from a nest of straw. Linda Moffat, as pretty as a kitten herself, took the business of choosing her pet very seriously, and was given much unsolicited advice from her companions. "Don't you take that black and whitenin', Linz. See his paws? Always be filthy, them white paws. I reckons he looks the best. He do seem to stand up stronger, don't he? More push-like. That other's the prettiest," and so on. The infants, who were in my room, milling round with their elders while this great decision was being made, became querulous, for they were dying to put both in bed in the waiting cradle. "Buck up, Linda. They's both nice, Linda. Don't matter which one." Linda's troubled eyes met mine. "I wish I could have them both. The other's got to be drownded." There was a shocked silence. I looked at Jimmy Waits. "That's right, miss," he said, his underlip quivering. "My dad drowns 'em," volunteered Joseph Coggs with some pride. "He does all the kittens down our end of the village." He was stroking a fluffy head with a black stubby finger. He looked up into my face. What he saw there must have called forth his sympathy. "He uses warm water," he said earnestly. "Can't you find a home for the other one, Jimmy?" I asked, turning aside hastily from all the disturbing implications of Joseph's kindly remark. "Mrs. Bates up by the post office was going to have it, but she's got a puppy now that Bill Bates gave her for her birthday. No one else don't want it." "Who thinks they could have it?" I canvassed. The whole of Fairacre School instantly raised eager hands. "Well," I temporized, "you'll have to ask your mothers, of course. Meanwhile, Jimmy, I'll keep the other one, and if someone wants it, I will hand it over." At this happy outcome, the noise was terrific. The infants showed their joy by jumping heavily, fists doubled into their stomachs, onto the resounding floorboards. The older ones cheered and banged their desk lids, and we were all but deafened. Mr. Willett entered at this moment, said, "Mafficking relieved?" and was so taken with his own shaft of wit that he broke into gusty laughter, and I began to wonder if order would ever be restored. The kittens, with remarkable composure, sat in the straw and washed their paws elegantly, despising disorder and death itself with the same fastidious good breeding that the French aristocrats showed in the shadow of the guillotine. "Sweets for quiet children," I roared above the tumult. It worked, as always, like a charm. The infants fled into their own room, being careful to leave the dividing door open so that I could see their exemplary behavior. My own children melted into their desks, crossed their arms high up on their chests, put their sturdy country boots decorously side by side, and glared ahead at the Angelus behind my desk with unblinking gaze. Only when the sweet tin was in Patrick's grasp and the fruit drops were being handed round did they relax and breathe again. There are some foolish and narrow-minded theorists who would condemn the use of a sweet tin in schools, dismissing this valuable and pleasant adjunct to discipline with such harsh words as bribery or pandering to animal greed. I stoutly defend the sweet tin. If the good Lord has seen fit to provide sweets and children's tastes to match them, then let us take advantage of the tools that lie at hand. Linda carried the basket to the other room and introduced the kittens to their new bed. "I think I'll have the tabby one," she said as she returned and closed the dividing door behind her. She brushed a straw from her immaculate gray flannel pinafore frock and resumed her place. The important business of the afternoon now over, we addressed ourselves to poetry at the silent but stern behest of the timetable on one side and the school clock on the other. I met Dr. Martin as I was going to the grocer's after school. He said that he had quite recovered from his illness. I wondered if his own or Boots' cough mixture was responsible for his return to health, but did not say this out loud. He was just off, he said, to pay 6 calls on people he supposed he would find in better health than he was himself. He had never known his surgery so besieged. After he had rattled off in his disreputable old car, I went on my errand, pondering, not for the first time, on the remarkable self-flattery of most doctors. Do they honestly think, always excepting the 5% of humanity that is incorrigibly neurotic, that some people go to see them for pleasure? Do they seriously imagine that sensible men and women subject themselves to the miseries of doctors' waiting rooms, of cold medical implements, and of colder medical fingers, with the further possibility of such horrors as injections and enemas to come, for the fun of the thing? Or, as one would be led to believe from comments dropped by some doctors, for the express purpose of adding to the burden that already breaks the doctor's back. When one hears such a cheerful and sturdy medical man as our beloved Dr. Martin talking in this fashion, it poses a number of unanswerable questions. On Saturday, the village was shocked to hear of the death of young Peter Lamb. He was killed in a motorcycle accident on the way home from a football match in Caxley in the afternoon. He was 17 and the only child of the Lambs who keep the post office. The motorcycle was their present to him on his last birthday. He spent hours polishing the gleaming monster on the lawn at the side of their house. I taught him for only a year, as he went on to Mr. Annett at Beech Green at 11, but I remember him as a very happy boy. Mr. Willett told me this ghastly news after morning service. He was pacing among the graves on his melancholy sexton's business of choosing a site for the grave he must dig. "Terrible business," he said, blowing out his ragged mustache with a sigh. "The old slip away, and there's some left to grieve, but often they're friends that would have taken it hardest to gone before. But a young fellow like this, well, miss, 'tis not just his own that loses him, 'tis every mortal in the village." "Send not to know for whom the bell tolls," whispered a voice in my head as Mr. Willett echoed John Donne across the centuries. "Take the cricket team. Longstop he was. We've got no one like him to fill that place. I suppose when it comes to it, John Pringle will have to move over from deep field, and that lily-livered young Bryant that flinches at mid-on will have what he's always wanted and be put out in the field." Mr. Willett stepped around the tombstone. "Take the bell ringers. More shifting around to train up a new chap for Peter's place. Hard work for us all, you'll see. He'll be missed sadly." It tolls for thee. Nowhere do John Donne's words, "No man is an island," more poignantly applied than in a small community like a village. As a pebble in a pond spreads its ripples far about, so has this blow affected us all. "Peter used to mend my bike for me," 9-year-old Eric said, emerging from the vestry where he had been blowing the organ. "He always took my wireless batteries into Caxley to be recharged," said old Mrs. Bates among the knot of villagers at the church gate. "He was going out steady with that girl at Beech Green. She'll take it hard, I don't doubt," said another. As the vicar said later from the pulpit, "We are indeed members of one another." But there was more to all this sober mourning than grief for one young man. The village was robbed, and we were all, every soul in Fairacre, poorer for it. Miss Clare came over to tea and spent the evening. The little cat, still with me, and I imagine for good now, rolled ecstatically on the hearthrug in the warmth of the fire. Miss Clare was knitting a green pullover, and the ball of wool had to be rescued every now and again. We talked naturally of poor Peter Lamb, and Miss Clare surprised me by saying that the pullover had been intended for him. "He always dug over my vegetable patch every spring and autumn, and I could never get him to take any money. Sometimes he'd take cigarettes, but this time I thought I'd get on with the pullover for next winter." "What will you do with it now?" I asked. She looked across at me with her wise, calm gaze. "I shall finish it," she said composedly. "A lot of work has gone into it, and I shall finish it as well as I can and give it to the cricket club." She smoothed it lovingly. "It will make a nice prize for their whist drive next winter when they raise money for the club." This eminently sensible and realistic approach I could not help but admire. So surely should all life's buffets be met with dignity and good sense. But how many of us have Miss Clare's courage? "I can't think what to call this kitten," I said, to lighten our solemnity a little. "What do you suggest?" Miss Clare addressed herself to this problem with as much thought as she had given to the right disposal of Peter's pullover. "I have always called mine, one after the other, plain Puss," she admitted, frowning with concentration, "but you could think of something more interesting." I went on to enlarge on the difficulties of naming a cat. I abhorred the idea of anything, as dear Eric Blore, in Top Hat, I think, said with a divine exhalation of breath, "too whimsical." None of your La Belle Finifella, or even Miss Bertha Briggs for my respectable Fairacre cat. "And because he's black and white, I'm not sinking to such obvious nonsense as whiskey or magpie," I went on, now well launched. Nor do I like Tom, Dick, Harry, Jane, Peggy, Betty, or anything for that matter which sounds as though I'm talking about a lodger to people who don't know my circumstances. It certainly is difficult, Miss Clare agreed and let her knitting needles fall into her lap. We lapsed into silent thought. By the firelight, I could see that Miss Clare was deep in meditation. Her face was so wistful that I imagined that her mind had strayed back to the all-pervading sadness of young Peter's death. Perhaps she too, I thought, is feeling the penetrating truth that Dawn summed up for us. She raised meditative eyes and looked earnestly at me. "Come to think of it," she said slowly, "I did have one cat called Tom." Oh, lovely, lovely life that can toss us from horror to hilarity without giving us time to take breath. No matter how dark it may be, yet unfailingly, cheerfulness breaks in. March. March has come in like a lion, with a vengeance this year. The wind has whipped round to the east again, and hailstorms have been frequent and heavy. A number of the children were caught in one on the way to school, and Joseph Coggs and his two small sisters were in tears with the painful wrapping they had taken. Their clothes were quite inadequate, not a thick coat between them, and the two little girls in skimpy cotton frocks, and layers of dirty jumpers and cardigans on top. Of course, their legs are mauve with cold, and they look chilled to the marrow. It always surprises me to see how many of the mothers fail to clothe children consistently. The little things come to school in winter with, perhaps, a snug woolen bonnet and scarf, a thick coat, and then there comes a long expanse of cold-mottled legs, terminating more often than not in minute cotton socks. Mrs. Moffat makes Linda neat tailored leggings, and of course a few of the children go into sensible corduroy dungarees for winter wear. But the common feeling seems to be that if they are muffled up above the waist, the legs can take care of themselves. A number of messages I get in the cold months explain absences due to stomachache or a chill inside, and they do not surprise me. The Battle of the Wellingtons continues to rage through this bad spell. I will not allow the children to wear them all day in school and insist that a pair of slippers, or failing that, a thick pair of old socks, are brought into school to wear indoors. "But my dad wears his all the time," they protest. "My mom says what's good enough for my dad's good enough for me." One can hardly retort that the antisocial condition of dad's feet is only one of the reasons for insisting on changing one's rubber boots. But gradually, by dint of hygiene lessons and fulsome praise for those good children who do bring slippers as requested, we are slowly getting an improvement in this direction. Mrs. Annett has given her notice, which means that she leaves Fairacre School at the end of April. We shall all miss her sorely. The vicar has already started drafting an advertisement for insertion in Teacher's World and is almost in despair about finding suitable lodgings for a new teacher in the village. "I shouldn't cross that bridge yet," I told him. "We may not get any applicants for the post." "Oh, my dear Miss Reed, please, please," protested the poor man, beating his leopard skin gloves together and creating a light shower of moth-eaten fur in the classroom. "I cannot bear to think what the future holds for Fairacre School. Whatever happens, it must not close. It shall not close." Here the vicar looked and sounded as militant as Uncle Toby in Tristram Shandy when he too was faced with the extinction of a body much beloved. "But sometimes I wonder, poor Springborn, you know, I hate to pass that little empty school with its dreadful blank windows. And dear Miss Davis, they tell me, is finding that large school in Caxley much too much for her and is struggling with nearly 50 6-year-olds. I said how sorry I was for her. She is an elderly gentlewoman who smoothed the path of her little flock at Springborn for many years. The bustle of Caxley, as well as a tiresome bus journey, must have exhausted her considerably. "And I have heard," added Mr. Partridge, with horror darkening his benevolent countenance, "that some of those children, young as they are openly defiant." He looked round at our own meek lambs, who were busy coloring border patterns in a somnolent way, and his expression softened. I hoped that he would not notice the pronounced bulge in Ernest's cheek, which I guessed harbored a disgusting lump of bubble gum. His eye traveled lovingly over the class, and he sighed happily. "How fortunate we are here," he said. "They are dear, good children, all of them." And, heavy with bubble-gum guilt, as some of them obviously were, I could not help but agree with him. It would indeed be a tragedy if Fairacre School were to close, but I do not think it will happen here, as we maintain a steady number of about 40, which makes a good workable two-teacher school, with Mrs. Annett taking the infants and the juniors being taught by me until the age of 11. But alas, Springborn's fate has been shared by several others in the neighborhood, and more are scheduled to close within the next few years. This closing of small village schools is a controversial and debatable problem. There is no doubt that some of the really small schools of, say, 18 or fewer children on the roll, under the sole charge of a head teacher, should be closed for several very good reasons. The biggest difficulty in these one-teacher schools is the age range from babes of 5-year-olds to children ready for secondary education at the age of 11. Conscientious teachers who have tackled this type of school single-handed year after year realize how impossible it is to do justice to every child. A newly admitted baby of 5, homesick and mother-sick, can demand vociferously urgent and immediate attention for perhaps a week or more before he really settles into his new environment. It is disconcerting, to say the least of it, to the rest of his classmates, some of whom may have added anxiety of 11-plus examinations hovering over them. It is well-nigh impossible, too, to organize team games, which junior children so much enjoy and which will play so great a part in their later school life. Stories, poems, and songs, broadcast programs, films, and classroom pictures must be chosen with the interests of 5 as well as of 11-year-old children in mind. But perhaps greater than all of these teaching problems is the human one. It can be a very lonely life for a teacher, and the care of even such a tiny band of children can be a responsibility which in some cases becomes too heavy to be borne. It is small wonder that these lonely women, devoted and conscientious, are often the prey of nervous disorders such as rheumatic pains, headaches, and neuralgia. Maybe the cross drafts that play so merrily between Gothic doors and ecclesiastical windows have something to do with it, but the mental strain is always there, and it takes a particularly robust and cheerful woman to cope successfully and alone for years on end with these fascinating but exacting little schools that are so much a part of our English village life. The upkeep of some of these tiny places is, of course, out of all proportion to the number of children taught, which accounts for the transfer of pupils to one nearby. But it seems to me equally improvident to overcrowd one school by bringing busloads of children from others, and this may well happen. Probably the ideal rural school is the 3-teacher one, with a teacher for the infants, one for the younger juniors of 7 to 9, and the head teacher taking the rest up to the age of 11. Though why the head teacher should not take the infants, I don't know. The longer I teach, the more positive I am that it is the first 3 years of a child's school life that really matter most. But village populations are not made to order, and local education authorities are not to be envied as they deal with children, parents, managers, ratepayers, the church, and the Ministry of Education. However, at a time like this, when harassed and nerve-wracked individuals rush to the countryside at every opportunity, there to revive their flagging energies and to find that balm of hurt minds, fresh air and country sounds and scents, it seems decidedly odd to do away with village schools, which are the very essence of country education. What a child may learn on his daily walk to school along a country lane will never be forgotten. And to know intimately the changes that come to plants and trees, to birds and insects, as the full cycle of the 4 seasons turns, is a source of joy and wonder to the child, who is the father of the man. And we'll continue through March next time.